as much as it really, really sucks, I think we have no choice but to just slam Titan here and hope that it works. So, it's not going to work. It's almost definitely not going to work, but we don't really have a choice. If our opponent just plays a turn 2 Stoneforge here, then we actually just have lethal on him. That's interesting. Hello and welcome everybody. We are back here for a new league, and this time we're playing what I would consider to be the current best list, at least in my opinion, against the meta that we're seeing now, today being the 18th of July in 2021. Just to catch you up, Ragavan is everywhere. Black-red Ragavan decks playing things like Lurrus and Bobble and Ragavans and Doubtfully Voidwalkers and that kind of stuff. Like this black-red aggro / mid-range deck with Thoughtseizes and stuff. It's huge. Dragon's Rage Channeler is everywhere. We've even seen it in some of the red-white, more aggressive, artifact-based lists. I've seen some of them trying to play Ragavan and Channeler. And of course, there's blue-red Murktide that are playing Dragon Rage Channeler, the Ragavans, Murktide Regent, and counterspells, and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of that is stuff that Amulet would usually have a lot of trouble against, and that's because any opponent that's applying early pressure and disrupting you at the same time, Amulet is going to have a hard time because it's difficult to have the cards needed to play a Titan while also stopping your opponent from killing you, especially when you have to play through counterspells and discard. And so this list that you see in front of us is engineered to combat the blue-red Murktide, the Dragon's Rage Channeler type strategies, particularly blue-red Murktide and the black-red Dragon's Rage Channeler builds and things along those lines. And we also see quite a bit of early interaction, which is going to be useful not just against those types of decks, but also against Hammer Time, one of the bigger decks in the format right now. We have some explosives and dismembers and Force of Vigors and Foundation Breaker and all kinds of stuff to help put a stop to that, and Arboreal Grazer in the main board is a bit of a roadblock. So let's talk a little bit about some of the choices that are being made to address these matchups in particular. So first of all, and this should not be news to anyone watching at this point, almost every Amulet list that you see is going to be rocking 4 copies of Arboreal Grazer, the 1-mana 0/3 reach that lets you put a land into play immediately. Not only is this card going to be better against potential removal spells, as it does put your land into play instantaneously, it also allows you to block things like Ragavan, and it chump blocks very big creatures like Death Shadows. It's very good against your opponent's early aggressive starts. It puts something in the way of your opponent's Hammer Time creature or whatever. And of course, we need to be playing 4 of that particular effect, especially in the main board here, as otherwise Amulet doesn't really have a way to deal with a turn 1 Ragavan. Other than that, in the main board, we only have 2 other interesting choices, I would say. The first is we are playing a main board copy of Bojuka Bog. I've talked about this a little bit in the previous leagues that we played, but so far, despite what everybody else is playing in Amulet, I have found main board Bojuka Bog to be extremely, extremely relevant, as being able to resolve a Titan and search for a Bog to try to stop your opponent from resolving a Murktide Regent, to be able to turn off their Dragon's Rage Channelers so you're not taking damage through the air, to be able to shrink your opponent's Tarmogoyfs, get rid of their baubles or creatures that are in their graveyard for Lurrus, all kinds of stuff. Even against Hammer Time, sometimes exiling your opponent's graveyard can be relevant, especially if you've blown things up with Force of Vigor or Foundation Breaker or explosives, and your opponent is threatening to rebuild with Lurrus. Even in those matchups, a Bog can be useful. So right now, I actually find Bog to be at a very high amount of utility here. And then the other thing that we're doing in the main board here is I've cut the 1 Crumbling Vestige for a second copy of Cavern of Souls. Jerry is still out on this one. I'm testing it at the moment. The logic is that with Saga in the mix, it's more likely that we're going to have a double Amulet draw, in which case actually getting Crumbling Vestige usually doesn't matter. So in the case that we're not really using Crumbling that much, I'd rather switch it for a green source for turn 1 that helps us play around the counterspells of the world, and so we are going with a second Cavern. Might be wrong. Definitely the loosest choice, I think, in this list, but here we are to test it. If we don't test it, then how else will we know? So, regardless, that's about the main things in the main board that are going on here that I think are particularly unusual. So let's hop into the sideboard here and take a look at some of the choices that are being made, as that is the spiciest part of this list. So the first thing to notice is we are playing 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus and 3 copies of Veil of Summer. Relic in particular I found to be exceedingly good recently for several reasons. One is, of course, it's very, very good against Dragon's Rage Channeler, letting you tap it every turn just to shrink their Channeler and make sure they're not hitting Delirium, as Delirium is pretty soft to Relic of Progenitus. They typically will only have 5 or 6 cards in their graveyard at a time, and relicking away one of them might be the difference between them having a 3/3 flying channeler and a 1/1 on the ground, and that's huge. It also is very good against things like the Mishra's Bauble Lyris decks. It's very good against your opponent's Murktide Regents, and in general, I found Relic to be very good. You can also just crack it to exile all the graveyards for a one-time effect and draw a card, so that it is kind of helping you smooth out your draw and keep your opponent at bay a little bit. So I've been very impressed by Relic. And, of course, one other upside of playing 3 Relic of Progenitus in the sideboard is it gives us some tech against Living End, one of those cascade strategies that's become a little more popular, I would say, recently. Having a Relic of Progenitus to slam into play and just hold there until your opponent is forced to Living End into it and try to do some stuff to play around it, or like, I don't know, bounce your Relic or something crazy. It extends the game quite a bit and buys you a lot of time, and maybe that'll help you win the game. So I like having access to Relic here. And then, of course, we are playing Veil of Summer. And like I said, this is a card that I'm playing specifically to cover the blue-red Murktide matchup and the black-red Ragavan matchups. So against blue-red Murktide, having Veil of Summer can be the difference between resolving a game-winning Primeval Titan through your opponent's counter magic and just getting your Titan counterspelled and then losing to their incremental advantage. And against the black-red decks of the world, your opponent goes turn 1 Inquisition, and you've got your forest out, you just tap it, Veil of Summer, 2 for 1 them, they don't get to see your hand and rip it apart, and it also will retroactively save things like Dryad and Primeval Titan from effects that would otherwise kill them, like Terminate, for example. So, Veil of Summer is going to help us in those matchups particularly. It's also going to have some crossover in some other more fringe matchups, but like I said, it's mainly for those couple. We are playing 3 full copies of Dismember. I found Dismember to be quite good recently as well, against the turn 1 Ragavan decks, but also against Stoneforge Mystic decks that are trying to kill you with Cauldra. They spend 2 mana, play Stoneforge. Next turn, they spend 2 more mana, activate Stoneforge, put Cauldra into play, thinking that that Cauldra will buy them the game over the course of a couple turns, and you go, Dismember your Cauldra. You take 4 damage, makes their creature a 0/0, and due to state-based actions, their Cauldra Germ token will die. And of course, a Cauldra in play without a creature attached to it is not that particularly great. But of course, Dismember is also very good against the opponents who are trying to play Colossus Hammer and attach it to a creature they control with Sigarda's Aid, for example. Then dismembering their creature and getting rid of their one-time Hammer ETB effect is going to be crucial in those matchups. Dismember is going to be invaluable there. And then, of course, we've got the other regular stuff going on. We've got Ghost Quarter for the Tron matchups and for the Amulet Mirror. We've got Explosives for anything that wants to have permanents on the battlefield, and Force of Vigor and Foundation Breaker for anything that wants to play artifacts and enchantments, and that's pretty much the deal. So yeah, who knows how we'll do in this league, but let me know what you think about this list, what changes that you would make. And the other thing that I should mention before we jump into the league here is Veil of Summer in particular is a card that is not very widely played in Amulet because a lot of times it fits very awkwardly on the curve, and we'll see if that comes up in this upcoming league. Again, this is what I'm trying out specifically to tackle a couple of difficult matchups. We will see how effective Veil is at that goal throughout this league. So, anyways, like I said, let's just jump straight into match 1 here. Alrighty, let's hop in here for the match. Oh, looks like we are on the play. That's great, that's great. We'll hit yes to that button. And we are immediately greeted with a triple Amulet hand. No bounce land. So, it's been a while since I did this, so let's just go ahead and jump into a hypergeometric calculator to determine how likely we are to actually hit a bounce land, specifically a green bounce land, with this hand. I'll see you guys there. Alright guys, so we are here with StatTrek's hypergeometric calculator, and with this tool, we can figure out how likely we are to draw a green bounce land. So our population size is our current deck size, which is 53 cards. In our deck, we have 8 green bounce lands, not including the Boros Garrison, of course, because it doesn't tap for green. So that's our number of successes. We would like to see what the likelihood is that we top deck a bounce land immediately, so that our sample size will be 1 card drawn off the top, and we would like to see 1 bounce land in that sample size. And just that one particular statistic, we are only 15% likely to draw a bounce land off the top immediately. If we extend this to another turn from now, say 2 draws, it jumps up to 30% just about, and if we give this a 3rd draw, which is kind of stretching it a bit, then it jumps up to 40%, but as you can see from the math, we are less than 50% chance to hit that bounce land in the top 3 draws, and we're on the play, which means that we don't even get to draw for this turn. So, in my opinion, while others would call me a coward for mulliganing this hand, I think this hand is actually just not good enough to keep. So, I'm going to mulligan it. And here we see a hand that has Explore for redraws. We have a 3rd land drop. Any single bounce land would let us activate Castle Garenbrig here. Even a Boros Garrison, probably, because we can Vesuva copying one of these 2 in play. So, this definitely seems like a better hand. And again, because we are missing either a land, a bounce land in particular, or 2 lands here, and because the second Amulet is actually kind of redundant here, I'm inclined to bottom the Amulet so that we have the Amulet for ramp, we have Explore for ramp and a redraw, and we have a Titan ready to go. So I think that there's no reason to be keeping a second Amulet here. Again, you could try to spike one of those bounce lands off the top, and in 4 out of 10 games, you would be able to do that, but regardless, I'd rather play towards the higher likelihood that we just top deck a couple lands and can slam Titan very soon, especially against a Hallowed Fountain deck. It's probably better that we have an Explorer here than a second Amulet, as our opponent might be having some sort of interaction. So let's go ahead and, I guess, Vesuva copying this forest. Don't need to show our opponent that we have Castle Garenbrig, although we might be about to play it. Trying to save this Bojuka Bog so that we can use it at a later date. I'm actually going to go ahead and just play out the breeding pool here. We might be able to just play our 5th land drop as a Castle Garenbrig and completely surprise our opponent when they think that we can't cast Titan. It's unlikely to happen, but technically possible. Chalice on 0. Interesting. Dryad. Well, if we jam this into Counterspell, and then jam Titan the turn after using Garenbrig, then they're less likely to have interaction. I think that's probably our best way to win this game, unless we're trying to specifically top deck one of the two Cavernous Souls that we're playing. I think right now is the best time to slam a Dryad anyways, so I don't think we play a land first either, because we don't want to give them any information, so let's just play the Dryad. If it gets countered, it gets countered, no big deal, and then we can exile with Bog. It doesn't. Yeah, I guess we're probably supposed to play out our land drops here, so we'll Bog them, I guess. We could Bog ourselves in case they're playing Tarmogoyf or something, but let's be honest, that's just not going to be relevant ever, so they play land. They fetch. Watery Grave. Interesting. So this is an Esperless playing mainboard Chalice of the Void. That's kind of strange. Teferi to bounce our Dryad. Well, we get to just play a Titan and haste it and attack with it, so we're doing pretty good here. They were probably banking on our last card not being exactly Primeval Titan. They might even have a Force of Negation here. Our opponent concedes the game. Yeah, they definitely didn't expect us to just slam Titan here, so maybe they were hoping we'd have a Summoner's Pact or something that we couldn't cast into Chalice. I don't know. Regardless, feels good to win that game, and we will want Veil of Summers for our opponent's potential counter magic. Relic of Progenitus is arguable. It's better than getting a redundant amulet off of a Urza Saga, so at least one relic makes sense. That helps us keep Snapcaster Mage under control for the most part, is the only reason we're really considering Relic. I don't think it's really that strong. I think having one Relic to cantrip off of is probably a good choice. Let's see, in this matchup, actually, I don't think we really have much else to sideboard in here, unfortunately. We could bring in Force and Foundation Breaker, specifically for our opponent's Chalice of the Voids, but I don't know how much I really care for that. We can just trim on Summoner's Pacts, which we want to do anyways in a control matchup anyways, so let's just trim down to 2 and it'll be fine. We can trim Radiant Fountain here, as even if our opponent has things like Vendilion Click or whatever to clock us, I don't really care. I just don't want a colorless land that gives us only a very slight and marginal benefit. We'd rather have Urza Saga, for example, for additional threats. And we do have to trim one more. It's probably just an Arboreal Grazer. In fact, we could probably be trimming more heavily on Grazers. I think I'd rather have relics than Grazers, as they do cantrip. And we can have one Grazer, I guess, to pack for or whatever. I don't think Grazer is particularly strong here. It might even be better to have Foundation Breaker over the last Grazer, just in case we want to kill a Chalice. I mean, I guess that makes sense. It's also possible our opponent is playing things like Urza Saga and a more artifact-based strategy. I kind of doubt it, but I don't think we want this Grazer anyways. I almost forgot to board them out. We could have explosives specifically for Chalice, because we could tap a colorless land like Urza Saga and then play explosives on 1 using 0 colors, and then it wouldn't get countered by the Chalice, but it would still come in with 0 counters and allow us to kill a Chalice of the Void. And it would also help us kill Ashiok if our opponent has it. Maybe that's better than having Foundation Breaker. I think it's probably worth trying. Is it better than having Relic? Probably. Nah, probably not, actually. Let's only bring in 1 explosives. We're making very small hedges here. We could trim a Garen Brig, perhaps, to bring in a 2nd explosives. I don't think it really makes sense to do that, though, so... And I mean, we immediately see the downside of Relic, as they're not really doing much in this particular opening hand. We can play them on 1, though, and we have lots of mana, but we don't really have any business at all. I kind of feel like we should mulligan this. I don't really have a particular way to describe why. It just feels like it doesn't really do much. Like, if we just let our opponent slam a couple Planeswalkers while we're over here doing nothing, then we probably just lose to that, so we'll mull. And we already have a hand with Veil, so that's already looking good for us. And we get to play Saga to make some threats here, so we're definitely keeping this. I think we bottomed the Boros Garrison. I mean, we might want to pick up our Saga before we have to sacrifice it to get more tokens out of it, but I kind of doubt it. We'll just bottom the Garrison. Kind of an awkward one to have in hand. So, alright, let's see what our opponent leads off on here. Very short game 1 against the control deck. Darkslick Shores. No discard spell. Well, I think we should play around discard anyways. Again, why throw this Relic into play that... Like, it would be kind of pointless, right? Rather hold up the Veil of Summer in case we need to spike a discard spell, which I'm not expecting our opponent to be playing, but it is technically possible. Stoneforge Mystic. That one I was not expecting at all. We might want to be bringing in Dismembers for this matchup. Okay, well, we kind of got blindsided by the Stoneforges. Yeah, we'll play out a Saga here. We'll play a Relic of Progenitus, I guess, and feel stupid for it. We'll exile a card from their yard and pass, and we might even be cracking this Relic to draw a card on their instep, as we're probably just going to get outclocked by this Cauldron here, so... I really was not expecting this one. I guess that's the benefit for our opponent scooping so fast in game 1, is that we have limited information, right? Disenchant Saga. Veil of Summer only protects against blue and black spells, so unfortunately we can't actually do anything about this. At least our opponent's not putting Cauldron into play, but admittedly we would really, really prefer to have the Saga in play here. I think we just have to go ahead and cycle the Relic. And this is exactly why, for reasons such as hitting Explore off the top. If it were 2 cards down, it would have had a very distinct impact. Stronghold. I guess playing the Stronghold is better if we top deck exactly Amulet. We have 4 of those to potentially top deck. Growth Chamber exposes us to Field of Ruin as well, so I'm just going to throw out the Stronghold here. I imagine we're probably about to start taking hits from Cauldron about this turn if our opponent has a 4th land drop. Yep. Here's the activation. Here's the Cauldron. No land. Okay. I mean, we definitely want to play Dryad here. We'll float the mana. We'll start by playing a land drop in case our opponent has Path to Exile. They could respond to our Simic Growth Chamber trigger here. So we'll do this first. And now we're guaranteed to get a 2nd land drop. We want Veil of Summer up this turn. Thinking probably not. If we play out the Tolaria West here, then we can top deck an untapped land and be able to play land Titan with Veil of Summer up. And that could be pretty close to game winning, depending on what our opponent has. Because we can't search for Valakut with the Dryad here, so... I guess maybe holding up Veil to stop them from being able to Teferi bounce our Dryad would have been fine. Obviously, we're not blocking here. Yeah, if our opponent is just holding up, like, Cryptic Command or a single counterspell here or something, then untapped land would have helped. We don't have it, however. We can just slam Titan, and because of this Cauldron, I kind of feel like we need to, unfortunately. We could also pack for another Dryad and play it, but then we're tapped out. We don't have a bounce land, potentially, to try to Titan the turn after, since we have to pay for the pack trigger, so as much as it really, really sucks, I think we have no choice but to just slam Titan here and hope that it works. So, it's not going to work. It's almost definitely not going to work, but we don't really have a choice. Next turn we can do this with Veil up if we top deck any land. Not any land. I guess it would have to be a bounce land or an untapped land, but... Yep, there's the counterspell that we were hoping that we would be able to play around, but we couldn't. And again, I don't think I'm in the market of chumping this Germ token, so I'm just going to swing. I guess they could have Batterskull, in which case swinging here is really bad, because they could activate Stoneforge, put in Batterskull, and then block, but... Oh well. They did have Batterskull, but they didn't block. Okay, well, I mean, we're still dead regardless, so we'll concede. We got blindsided by turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic. That's fine. Ironically, I don't think that the artifact and enchantment hate is particularly good against Stoneforge Mystic, but that means we do absolutely want Dismembers. Explosives is feeling kind of weak to me. I guess 1 is fine, but nah, actually, I don't want Explosives at all. Summoner's Pact is a little better against our opponent's Stoneforge deck because we are more likely to need Titan as fast as possible. And that also means that Veil is not quite as good, but they might be more reliant on like a single piece of interaction to stop Titan, so we can trim on Explorers. I don't want to trim too heavily, though. These relics are just awful, as we saw before, so maybe having a Grazer to play a turn 2 3-drop, a couple Grazers for that, and also be able to chump block makes Grazer reasonable here. Let's see, the Bajuka Bog seems really irrelevant if our opponent's just clocking us with Stoneforge as well, so we'll have an Explorer instead. Or is it better to have a third Grazer? I mean, chump block and Cauldra, Cauldra does have trample, by the way, but just taking 3 less points of life from a Cauldra and being able to enable us to play a turn 2 3-drop is pretty good here, especially on the play, as they can't just counterspell it, so probably worth it to have the third Grazer. Might be wrong, though, because Explorer helps us find more cards, especially if we're potentially top-decking Veils and don't have enough threats. Then cycling Explorer to find threats could be good, but I still don't think necessarily that we want Radiant Fountain either, and Cavernous Holes will help us play through counter magic, so I guess we could potentially trim Breeding Pool, expecting that we won't have the time to transmute. I think that's fine. We can have Radiant Fountain over the Breeding Pool. I doubt that that would hurt. Alright, we'll run it this way. And again, we don't really want Forces and Foundation Breakers, because the first thing our opponent is going to search for with their Stoneforge Mystic is Cauldra, so we'll obviously be on the play. We need to be able to race what our opponent has going on. We get a turn to Explorer, and not much else. You have Titan mana, no Amulet, no Saga. I think we should mulligan to try to find something a little more proactive. Here we have a turn 1 Amulet and a Saga, and we have a Titan rolled up, ready to go. We have a Titan mana, probably bottoming Sunhome. That seems fine. We're definitely keeping this. think bottoming Sunhome makes the most sense. We can also pack for Dryad to go along with our naturally drawn Valakut, so we'll go ahead and lead off on Saga, as it's very possible a turn 3 Titan will just be good enough here, so if we really wanted to, we could play Simic Growth Chamber this upcoming turn, activate Saga, and then pick up the Saga, or even just pick up the Growth Chamber, but turn 1 Colonnade, okay. This one has not aged well in the modern format, I hate to say it. If our opponent just plays a turn 2 Stoneforge here, then we actually just have Lethal on him. That's interesting. Right? I mean, we'll play the Garenbrig and pass, and hopefully our opponent doesn't have Force of Negation, in which case we can just pack for Titan and just do the thing where we basically just kill them. I guess they're not technically dead. There's a Stoneforge, okay. They're not technically dead because they can block 2 of the 20 damage we're about to send their way, assuming this resolves in the first place. Do it, we draw a Forest. Not helping a whole lot. We'll go ahead and float here. We'll get... I mean, there's the argument that we literally can't win the game if our Summoner's Pact doesn't resolve here, right? So maybe we should have packed it in response to this trigger just to know for sure whether our pact was resolving before we have to search, because if it wasn't resolving, then getting an expedition map would have been a great play, but now we have no choice but to kind of hope that it resolves, so... Okay, it looks like our opponent is F6'd. So we'll hit 5 to make sure there's no yields. We'll play Sanctuary since we can float a white. I don't know if that will be relevant, but we'll see. It'll be relevant if we can manage to set up a line where we can leave a Valakut in play. Our opponent scoops up. Alright, well, I guess they didn't want to play it out. What did they search for with Stoneforge anyways? Cauldra. Love to beat the turn 2 Stoneforge with a turn 3 Titan kill. How about that, huh? Well, we did not get to make use of Veil Summoner literally at all against our opponent's control deck. I guess they're more of like a mid-rangey control. There's definitely a control deck, but anyways, that was pretty fun, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Let me know what you think about this deck list, and I have nothing else to say. This is Red Face Menace, signing off.